Let's talk today about weird ways to transmit internet packets. Because why not? We're all cooped up at home. Let's talk about that. I'm talking about transmitting IP packets via birds and ham radios. Yeah, brought to you in part by Linode. If you want to set up your own internet server, and they don't transmit things via bird and ham radios, but they're still pretty darn cool. They use more traditional methods like wires and stuff. Going over to linode.com/Lunduke, set up a server, get a $20 credit for setting up whatever kind of server you want, a Nextcloud box, an SSH box just for fun, your own WordPress blog, whatever you feel like, because hey, $20 credit can't go wrong. All right, let's dive into this. Before we get too much further, I wanted to mention, because a lot of people have been asking for it, there are ways to support the Lunduke Journal. In the past, that way has predominantly been via Patreon, but a lot of folks don't love the Patreon. So what I've done, and I give like perks for people who support the show. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you that support the show via Patreon, and I love all of you. But for those of you who don't want to touch Patreon, no judging. We've also added a support, so you can actually subscribe via PayPal now as well. So if you want to get access to the weekly Ask Lunduke show, which we talk about all sorts of cool topics, and like this week we talked about what happens if you put GPL code inside of a book, about building 8-bit computers, about open source operating systems that aren't Linux, that kind of recreate old operating systems, all sorts of things. Go to lunduke.com, and on the bottom left-hand side, you'll see a little link that says support the Lunduke Journal. And there you have all the options, Patreon, PayPal, what have you. And seriously, every buckazoid that you put into the buckazoid slot there helps keep the lights on here at the Lunduke Journal, which, hey, every dollar helps, right? So let's dive into it. Now, if you are watching this, and if you want to read the articles, by the way, no judging. The Lunduke Journal is available audio, video, and in written article form all over at lunduke.com. So if you're watching this, you most likely have internet access. You probably have it either through a local cable or fiber ISP. I've got Fios here from Frontier, which is wonderful when it works, or through your cell phone provider. We all have at least one, usually often, many of us have more of these, right? It's speedy and it's reliable, sort of. It's boring. As boring is what I'm trying to say. Now, what happens when that infrastructure goes down? Maybe the power goes out somewhere along the network. My power went out yesterday, so I had no internet. My internet actually went down earlier in the day before my power went out. It was just like a cavalcade of everything's exploding. Actually, I woke up in the morning. I live in the state of Oregon, and like many other states, the state of Oregon yesterday morning basically said no more restaurants, right? So they said restaurants are closed due to Corona, no restaurants, no bars, no all that stuff, right? So I'm like, whoa, that's it's a big move. That doesn't happen every day. And then like an hour later, my internet goes out. I'm like, well, that's annoying. I want to watch the news or read the news or something. There's news going on. And then the internet comes back. Then the internet goes out again. And I'm like, oh, man. And then the internet comes back. And I'm like, okay. And then everything was fine through lunch. And then, boom, power goes out. And I'm just like, dude, that is just one too many apocalyptic things happening in one day. So we have to talk about what happens if you want internet to keep going when all that's out, right? So like maybe a cell tower gets attacked by Godzilla, right? Who knows? Who knows what happens? But dangers lurk around every corner, and the internet is fragile. It is a fragile beast. We love the internet. We have gotten better and better at keeping the internet up and running, but it is still a very delicate, fragile house of cards. It could come down at any moment. So now, in those cases, when it does come down, when your traditional network connection fails you, you're going to need a backup. Something to get you connected online, moving data around. And what the heck, we might as well do it all with as much flair and pizzazz as humanly possible, because that's what we do around here. Now, there are two options that jump out at me as ideally suited for just such a Godzilla-based network outage scenario. The first one is networking via ham radio. It's totally a real thing. It's totally real. It's called AMPR Net, the Amateur Packet Radio Network, AMPA Radio Network. And at first, sure, this sounds like a crazy idea. But did you know that the TCP/IP protocol was in use via amateur radio, ham radio, before the internet was accessible to the public? That's a true thing. That's absolutely a true thing. I mean, it was still accessible via, for people that weren't, just the average public. But the internet itself was accessible via ham radio before you had a DSL line. Long before you had dial-up internet access. Long before that. In fact, back in the 1970s, the entire 44 Class A block of IP addresses, like, 44.0.0.1, for example, the whole 44 block was assigned specifically for use with amateur radio. How cool is that? I don't think that's the case anymore. Because of that, this is sometimes called Network 44. So that just kind of became what it's called, this Network 44. Believe it or not, many people actually use it to this very day. HamWAN, this is a real thing. I've got links here. Go check out the link. So go to lunduke.com, click on this article, and check out the links. It's awesome. HamWAN in Western Washington State has a setup that it calls the Puget Sound Data Ring. Essentially, it's a bunch of sites all around the region, around Puget Sound, that are connected up to AMPERNet, the Amateur Packet Radio Network. It is super cool and it works. I've never run this myself. I've seen it in use though. A guy was kind enough to give me a tour of his ham radio setup and how he used a ham WAN to connect to it, which isn't something he did very often, but he could. So neat. So neat. It kind of makes me want to get something like that going, because then You're not reliant on the local ISP, right? I mean, in theory, you're reliant on whatever ISP is your jumping off point for whatever ham node basically you connect into. But oh man, super cool. But now, what if? Well, let's take this a step further, because that still requires electricity, and that still requires an internet connection on at least one point along that ham radio network, right? What if the power's out at that amateur packet radio network site? What if Godzilla takes all of that out? What are you going to do then? It's those sorts of scenarios where it makes sense to go a little more old school. More old school than ham radios being used to hop online in the 1970s, you ask? Why, yes. Way more old school. We're going back to ye olden times here, folks. I'm talking about internet via carrier pigeon. Yeah, seriously. This is a real thing, and it technically works. So it's called IP over avian carriers, or IPOAC, also known as RFC 1149. I've got links so you can read this all for yourself. I highly recommend reading the RFC. It is fantastic. It's not that long of a read, and it's glorious. This was first created back in April of 1990, specifically April 1st. Yeah, this is an April Fool's Day joke, but it works and it's real. It's a joke that is real, which is the best kind of joke. That RFC describes essentially using a bird to carry a piece of data, right? It's just like Game of Thrones, right? You stick a little note inside your raven and they go off and they deliver it where it's supposed to go, right? Sort of. It's a little different than that, because it's still IP networking. It's still basically TCP over IP, except via bird, right? Now, to be clear, this is not just some one-off April Fool's joke. No. IP over avian carriers actually has been updated twice. Once, it was updated to add a quality of service levels to the specification. Now, the quality of service levels for IP over avian carriers is literally things like coach, first class, and business class. Because they're flying, right? It makes sense. And once, where they added support for IPv6. Yeah, support for IPv6 was added to IP over avian carriers, the RFC for it, before IPv6 was implemented in many other places that are actually in use. Cool. Now, if you're thinking that transmitting IP data via homing pigeon would be slow, you'd be right. Half right. Check this out. In 2001, this is totally real. This is a real thing. A user group attempted to implement the first ever real-world implementation of such an avian-based protocol, right? They really did this. And a successful implementation it was. They had birds, they sent data with those birds, and they got responses back. The very first ping, an actual ping, via bird read as follows: 64 bytes from 10.0.3.1 ICMP sequence equals 0, time to live 255, time equals 6165731.1 milliseconds. Yeah, it's not exactly a speedy response here. And they lost a few packets in their testing. I mean, really. Birds don't always do exactly what you want. And with the ping times ranged from 3,211 seconds up to 6,389 seconds. And theoretically, that would increase even further the further away you get. But yeah, we're talking ping times of over 100 minutes between the sites in just this test scenario. Just for a ping. And it's not exactly speedy. We're not talking low latency gaming. You're not going to sit down and play a first person shooter here on this one. But consider this. So, slow, right? But you can send very, very large amounts of data on a single bird. Now, with how small SD and micro SD and USB flash drives have become, it would not be unreasonable to send a single bird with several terabytes or more of storage. Suddenly, it makes IP over avian carriers one of the fastest methods for transmitting data via IP on the planet. Assuming the birds actually go where you want it to go, right? But seriously, extremely slow. The highest latency you can possibly imagine. But the amount of throughput from a single bird is basically only limited by the size and weight that the bird can carry. So take a couple of, 500 gigabyte micro SD cards, stick them on the bird. You can send, 10 terabytes easy of data in a single carrier pigeon. Now, 10 terabytes is not great, but if it takes 100 minutes it's great. And if it takes 100 minutes to get there, that doesn't seem like that's very fast, but 10 terabytes in 100 minutes, it's pretty quick, right? Anyway, I think this is fascinating because in theory, what a great way to send data around. Who is it that has, is it Mike Tyson that has homing pigeons, that he trains pigeons, right? So Mike Tyson, if everything goes out and we have no internet and we have no power, Mike Tyson might be one of the few guys left in America that have internet access via homing pigeon. Oh man, that's my favorite. That's my ultimate favorite. If you guys know of any other great, completely off-the-wall sort of internet-based transmission mechanisms, let me know. IP over carrier pigeon is my absolute favorite. Oh, it's just fantastic. Anyway, thank you to everyone, again, who supports this show. Thank you to our sponsor, Linode, for helping to support the show, even in these trying times. Thank you to everyone who has a good sense of humor about them and makes things like IP over carrier pigeon a reality. Thank you to the ham radio people out there who keep things like ham radio internet access a reality. I mean, I know a lot of people don't use it. A lot of people don't even know it exists, but so cool that it's there. Oh, I love that. I love it so much. Again, if you want access to the Ask Lunduke show, our little premium podcast, go to lunduke.com, click on the Support the Lunduke Journal links, and you can get access there a variety of different ways. If you want to watch the videos or listen to the regular podcast that everyone has access to, all free, and all the articles, everything, again, go to lunduke.com. Links all along the left side of the page for YouTube and Library and iTunes and Google Play, RSS feeds galore. It's just phantasmagorious. All right. I'm happy now. If I get to talk about carrier pigeons with flash drives strapped to their feet, well, that just makes me a happy Lunduke. So hopefully it helped you guys out too. I'll see you guys tomorrow.